Now, this show deals, of course, a lot with the problems of minorities, however, this is the first time that I've had this particular minority problem on the air. Now, I don't care which, the lady or the gentleman goes first. I'd like you to tell me why you think you're discriminated against.
Well, no difficulty telling you why we think we're discriminated against. It's quite obvious. The federal government maintains that homosexuals are unemployable in any status, whether that be a street sweeper or a garbage collector, if the federal government has such things, to, and I'm sometimes cautioned not to say things like this, presidential assistants. Homosexuals, or those known as homosexuals, are categorically denied access to federal employment, and you should remember that approximately 5 million jobs currently come under federal employment. This includes approximately 250,000 in the military, 2.5 million in the military. Another demonstration of the prejudice against homosexuals is our very own state of Pennsylvania, which holds that even the private sexual acts of homosexuals who are adults are punishable by a maximum of 10 years in jail and or a $5,000 fine. These are just two of the ways in which the homosexual is discriminated against, and actually not even just discriminated against, but persecuted. I'm sure you have other questions to ask, but I'd just like to address myself to one of the first things you said. You said the problem of the homosexual. Well, the problem is not that there are homosexuals, but that there are people opposed to them.
What do you mean? The problem is not that there are homosexuals, a problem. First of all, we were talking about, you brought up two legal prohibitions. You didn't talk about any social prohibitions. Do you feel that you're discriminating? Oh, you want Barbara to talk about that. Well, I want to come back to your question. Well, Barbara, you want to talk about any social discriminations?
Well, these obtain as much for the male homosexual as for the female homosexual, but the need to conceal oneself, the need for secrecy, is one of the greatest pressures that's put upon the homosexual. The social conditions, the feeling, the anti-homosexual feeling, decree that if you're to get along in life, you've got to wear the mask. And this is an enormous strain on people, and it prevents them from utilizing their personal resources to the best. And in this country, we like to believe that we are creating an atmosphere and a climate in which people can be their best selves, but this is not permitted to the homosexual by and large.
I think that this can be most graphically illustrated if those of your audience who are heterosexual, perhaps we should take a moment just to define our terms, because for as many times as I've been on this program, I am sure that one of the phone calls we're going to get will somehow confuse what we're talking about. A heterosexual is a male or a female who is sexually attracted to a person of the opposite sex. In other words, the men like the women and the women like the men. A homosexual is someone who is sexually attracted to the same sex. In other words, the men like the men and the women like the women. Many people think that homo means man in this context when it really doesn't. It means same sex, like in homogenized, which...
like in milk.
Like in milk, where all the milk is the same. Now that we have those definitions set aside, at least for the time being, if the heterosexuals in your audience, those who are married, or just those generally, had to live constantly hiding the fact that they were heterosexual, what do you say when you come in the office in the morning and people ask you, what did you do last night? Do you say, why? I spent the night with a girl, if you happen to be a man? I mean, like, you don't say that if one had to conceal this. So one makes up stories, and one starts thinking, well, gee, maybe I'm not very good because everyone else doesn't like what it is that I am. And just try to place yourself in this very important area of sexual orientation as being an outcast. Just try to think how many things in your life are colored by your sexual orientation. And I am not, again, talking just about sexual matters. As a matter of fact, the sexual matters are, a minuscule portion of the kinds of persecution the homosexual has to face day in and day out, minute after minute. with the person who is a homosexual. There's always this denial, always. And Barbara very adequately pointed to the huge cultural price that society as a whole pays and the astronomical price that homosexuals themselves pay.
It's a waste of human resources, if nothing else.
Well, I think we are all wasting human resources. As you know, don't you believe that most of us wear masks all the time?
Not in the same sense that the homosexuals do, because this kind of a mask is one that you have to wear constantly, day in and day out, and you can only drop it when you're with your own kind.
Well, I understand that, but I think most of us wear masks most of the time and only drop it when we're at home or with people that we know. In fact, there's a play of Eugene O'Neill.
Mr. Burnett, if you were a homosexual, would you tell Mr. Reinhardt, the producer of this show, and would you go to, I don't know, does he still, does Mr.
Yeah,
Silk
he's right
still,
over there.
Does Mr. Silk still own the station?
As far as I know, he does, yes.
Well, would you walk into Mr. Silk's office or Mr. Reinhardt's office and say, you should have seen the cute little boy I had last night. He was over 21,
I
of
also
course.
wouldn't walk into Mr. Reinhardt's or Mr. Silk's office and say, you should see the cute little girl I had last night. I mean, I don't think that's the sort of conversation that I would open with either Mr. Reinhardt or Mr. Silk. I see no reason. I know some people do. I've always found it in bad taste. And I certainly see no reason for that to come up in the conversation. Now,
I think, though, Mr. Burnett, the kind of mask that you're talking about may be the kind of mask of public manners more than a mask of a completely different image of your person.
All right,
now,
I'll
you
agree
go
with
out in
that.
the morning, and you're not going to treat everybody you meet on the street or at your office, whatever it might be, the way you would relax with your wife at home.
Correct.
Because that's a domestic situation. It's easygoing. You're in your own home situation.
I'm most
you
honest
go
with
out.
my animals.
All right, you go out and you put on a certain kind of a mask, but it's just a small little mask of polite manners. We all do this, but the homosexual has a far larger burden that he has to cope with. The day in, day out pretense that he is something that he basically is not. And if you have never lived as a homosexual, it is very difficult to explain this.
And I've been on this show many, many times, maybe 10 at least.
Well, I'm glad you told me that.
And I will say that this is probably the most significant discussion we've ever had on this show about homosexuality, and I'd be very happy to stay right with this particular topic, because this discussion of the mask,
You overwhelm me.
the homosexual, this question of the mask that the homosexual has to wear, must wear, in probably 90% of his waking hours and probably some of his sleeping hours, is the greatest price that the homosexual has to pay.